So I want you to just picture this for a second. You're walking down a hallway. It's Chicago, November 2008.
Right after the election.
Exactly. The unbelievable has just happened. The victory celebrations are everywhere. And you're walking with David Axelrod and David Plouffe, the campaign's architects, on your way to see the president-elect.
Yeah. And Plouffe writes about this atmosphere. He says it was just electric. This, like, primal, overwhelming joy.
Yeah.
He describes security guards, many of them African-American, just breaking into cheers, some with tears in their eyes, thanking them. The gravity of it all was finally sinking in.
I mean, they just elected an African-American man who was, only 4 years out of the Illinois State Senate?
It's incredible.
And in that moment, Plouffe says he turned to Axelrod and just said, I'm having a hard time actually believing this. And Axelrod's response was perfect. He just said, it's too big to comprehend right now.
And that feeling, that sense of shock of pulling off something that was, statistically almost impossible, that's really the lens for our deep dive today.
Exactly. Our mission here is to unpack the audacious strategic blueprints of that 2008 Obama campaign. This was that unlikely endeavor that started from literally nothing.
Right, from scratch. They were struggling to find office space, trying to fill it with computers.
And somehow they defeated what everyone considered the political gold standard in both parties, first Hillary Clinton and then John McCain.
So we're dissecting how they mustered that audacity to win. We're really grounding this in the inside story, the organizational discipline, the counterintuitive calls, all based heavily on the perspective of campaign manager David Plouffe.
And this isn't just about a charismatic candidate. It's about the political operation that defied conventional wisdom at pretty much every turn.
Yes. This deep dive is about the how. How did they go from this, far-fetched idea to a historic victory in under 2 years? Let's get into it.
So the whole journey really starts with just one conversation. It's November 2006, right after the midterms. Plouffe and Axelrod are on their way to the very first meeting to even discuss the possibility of an Obama run.
And the feeling in the room, it wasn't optimism. It was more like duty.
Right.
It was really seen as probably the only meeting they would ever need for this far-fetched prospect. The political establishment, they already had their favorite. The odds were just impossibly high.
And Axelrod, the veteran strategist, he was pretty blunt with his team, right?
He was. He told them one of the others will probably win. But he said they should work for Obama anyway because he was the kind of guy who should be in politics.
Yeah.
Principled, smart, focused on something bigger.
Which led to that famous sort of cynical summary of the situation.
Yeah, we should work for the candidate with no chance, no money, and the funny name.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that long shot mentality, I think it ended up being one of their biggest strengths.
How so?
Well, when you have absolutely no expectations, you're free to take risks. You can be audacious.
That's a great point. And it's crucial that the candidate himself was the one who set the rationale for running. It was all about substance. It had nothing to do with political games.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in that first meeting, he laid out his assessment of the country. He said it needed deep, fundamental change, that Washington wasn't thinking long-term. Big challenges like energy and healthcare were just languishing, and he felt special interests had way too much power. He genuinely forced them to ask the question, did he offer something distinct enough to even merit a campaign? If the answer was no, he said he wouldn't run.
And that focus on deep fundamental change became like the central organizing principle for everything else.
It did, and it led straight to his one non-negotiable demand.
Yeah.
Build a campaign centered on grassroots re-engagement.
He was a former community organizer, so that was in his DNA. He knew that a mobilized, committed army of volunteers was the only way they could ever challenge the money and machinery of the frontrunner.
And this wasn't just talk. It wasn't just a slogan. Plouffe details exactly how these volunteers were meant to function. They weren't just, window dressing.
They had specific strategic roles.
3 of them, yeah. First, they were expected to actually fund the campaign through small-dollar contributions. This was meant to give them a level of financial independence that no campaign had ever had before.
Okay, so that's role 1. Be the bank.
Role 2 was to organize their own local communities. The campaign believed that a person-to-person ask, a real conversation, was the single most effective way to get new people, especially young people and sporadic voters, to show up to a caucus or a poll.
A personal touch beats a mailer every time.
Every time. And the third role was maybe the most important, especially in an era where trust in the media was already starting to fade.
Let me guess. They had to be the message.
They had to deliver the message themselves. They were meant to compensate for the filters of traditional media, to create this authentic human connection that could cut through all the noise of a campaign.
So this intense focus on purpose and authenticity, it had to translate into how they actually ran the place, right?
Absolutely. It led directly to a unique organizational philosophy, what they famously called the no drama dictate.
Right. No drama, Obama.
And the founders believed that campaign culture was right up there with strategy and money in determining whether you win or lose.
So this wasn't just about, being pleasant to your coworkers.
No, it was a competitive strategy. The goal was to build a disciplined organization where people didn't scream at each other, where crises were handled calmly, and where performance was measured objectively.
It was a direct contrast to what they expected from the Clinton operation, which was known for its infighting and personal ambition.
Exactly. It was a weapon.
But let me ask you this. In the absolute pressure cooker of a presidential campaign, especially against the Clintons, who were masters of political hardball, did that no-drama thing actually hold up? Wasn't there just immense pressure that could have fractured that whole idea?
It held up because they enforced it with ruthless consistency and started with the wallet. They ran the whole operation like a lean startup.
How so?
They imposed a really strict salary cap. No one in the campaign, with one single exception for the finance director, made more than $12,000 a month.
Wow. It's a good salary, but for senior strategists and directors, that is significantly less than what they could have made elsewhere.
It's maybe half. And that self-imposed sacrifice, it saved money, sure, but more importantly, it immediately removed all the professional drama that comes with salary negotiations.
No fighting over paychecks.
None. They also had a strict no-raise policy, unless your job changed dramatically. The thinking was that dealing with requests for raises, who gets them, how much, it just sucks up valuable time and creates the exact kind of internal drama they wanted to avoid.
Smart.
And that discipline extended to the chain of command, too. If some junior staffer went to Plouffe with an idea or a complaint, the answer was always the same. Talk to your boss.
So there is no, a court of appeals with the senior team. That's actually brilliant.
It is. It ensures the hierarchy is respected. It prevents backstabbing and people trying to jump the chain of command, which can paralyze a campaign. It kept everyone focused on the mission, not on internal politics.
And finally, they broke with political tradition on technology.
Big time. In almost every other campaign, new media, the website, online ads, texting, it all reports up to the communications department. It's just seen as another way to distribute a message.
But Plouffe saw it differently.
He saw the burgeoning online world as critical to every single part of the campaign: fundraising, organizing, mobilization. It wasn't a tactic. It was a core operational pillar.
So he had the new media team report directly to him, the campaign manager.
Directly to him. That elevates digital from being a comms tool to a central campaign strategy. They brought in Joe Rossbars, who was a veteran of Howard Dean's 2004 digital effort, to build this out.
So, okay, before they even raised serious money or won a single vote, they had the foundation set.
Exactly. A rationale driven by substance, a volunteer army ready to fund and deliver the message, and an internal culture rooted in no drama and ruthless efficiency.
Okay, so once that organization was, structurally sound, the challenge became the calendar, the race itself. And they didn't see it as a traditional national campaign where you just look at the polling averages to decide what to do. They saw it as a sequence of states.
Like dominoes. A strategic domino effect. And it all began in Iowa. This was the momentum theory.
And they really had no choice, did they?
None. There were 30 points behind Hillary Clinton in the national polls. A head-on national fight would have been, as Plouffe put it, quick and painful.
So they needed momentum. They had to get an early, unexpected win that would then affect the next context.
And that win would bring in media attention, small donors, more volunteers for the next wave of states. It was literally their only path forward.
This urgency, it even drove the timing of his announcement. Obama insisted on declaring really early, in February 2007.
Yeah, and the reason was simple. He needed to lay out his own principles, to define himself before the Clinton campaign could define him for him. He had to paint on the canvas first.
That early announcement forced a massive operational commitment from day one, though.
A huge one. They insisted on covering Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina right away, which just defied the normal, cautious timeline where you focus your resources narrowly at the start.
They had to build organizations in 3 key states from scratch, all at the same time.
And the deep organization they built in Iowa became, well, became legendary. It was a model of structure and scale, a mix of what they called novices and grizzled hands.
So you had young field organizers, many under 25, paired up with experienced pros like the political director, Emily Parcell, and the state director, Paul Hughes.
And Hughes had this incredibly ambitious, really granular idea. He called it working every community.
So this wasn't just about staffing the college towns and the big cities.
Not at all. They assigned staff to every demographic, every geographic corner, African-American communities, Latino communities, high school kids. They were even reaching out to registered Republicans months before anyone else was.
Which let them find new voters the competition wasn't even looking for. That sounds like a gigantic investment of time, money, and just sheer manpower. How did they translate that commitment into, a physical presence on the ground?
That's where the bricks and mortar strategy came in. Instead of setting up a few big, centralized regional offices, which is what campaigns normally do, they made an unprecedented investment in establishing county offices early.
So instead of one office for a whole region, they'd have smaller offices all over the place. What's the strategic advantage there?
A county office signals a much deeper, more permanent commitment to that specific community. The goal was simple. They wanted thousands of Iowans living and breathing the campaign every single day.
They wanted volunteers who felt like they had ownership, who could just walk into an office 5 minutes from their house.
Right. It expanded their reach way beyond just phone calls and canvassing. It empowered people to go talk to everyone they knew and, crucially, to expand the electorate.
And this commitment to running their own race, it required some serious discipline. They deliberately avoided what they called the pack.
Oh, yeah. They skipped the big orchestrated Democratic events, the major fundraisers, the county dinners that every other candidate felt they had to go to.
And they took a lot of heat for that from party leaders.
A ton of grief. People felt snubbed. But their philosophy was non-negotiable. Yeah, run our campaign on our own terms.
So every decision was measured against one thing. Does this expand the electorate and deliver our message? Not, does this make a political reporter or a party boss happy?
Exactly. And that discipline went all the way down to how they reported their fundraising numbers, which became a really early test of credibility.
Okay, explain that. The Clinton campaign was raising primary money and general election money at the same time.
Right. And then they'd combine those figures to project this image of overwhelming financial dominance, to feed that campaign of inevitability narrative.
And the Obama campaign.
They strongly discouraged raising general election money. They only focused on primary funds, and they worked really hard to make sure the press used that primary-only number to judge their strength.
And it worked.
It did. By the first quarter of 2007, they blew past their own expectations. Their organization was stronger than Clinton's in Iowa, they were matching her in New Hampshire and Nevada, and they were exceeding her in South Carolina. They were chipping away at that inevitability narrative just by being competent.
I think nothing shows their willingness to risk upsetting the establishment for strategic gain better than skipping the AFS-CME forum.
Oh, that was a huge one. For listeners, AFS-CME is the big public employees union, a massive, powerful player in Democratic politics.
And Obama was the only candidate out of 8 to skip their big presidential forum in Las Vegas. That takes some serious nerve.
It does. But the strategic calculation was just ruthless. Attending would have cost them valuable days they could have been using to sign up caucus goers in Iowa.
And Plouffe saw AFS-CME as a lost cause anyway, politically.
Right. The union president was known to be very close with the Clintons. So they defied the pressure, because a day spent getting signatures in Iowa was worth more to them than a day spent talking to an audience that was already spoken for.
And that decision, which the pundits killed them for at first, it turned out to be really illuminating.
It was. Plouffe noted it showed the Clinton campaign's core weakness.
Huh.
They could be pressured into attending these things, even when it wasn't in their strategic interest. The Obama campaign did the exact opposite. It became a touchstone for them. Whenever they dared to be different, whenever they took a risk, they were rewarded.
And this momentum wasn't just happening in Iowa. The campaign was getting really good at fostering organic growth all over the country.
They used these big rallies in places like LA, Cleveland, and especially Austin, Texas, not just to build enthusiasm, but as a tool for database growth.
The Austin event was huge, right? Like 20,000 people showed up.
It was massive. And it proved that you could translate that energy into actual practical support.
Which led to Austin's Travis County becoming their second biggest source of donors, right behind their home base in Chicago.
An incredible statistic. And they cultivated that by being really smart about how they scheduled fundraising events. They'd hold a small, low-dollar event right alongside a big, high-dollar dinner.
So the local news cameras wouldn't just see Obama with wealthy donors.
Exactly. They'd get that footage, but they'd also get great shots of hundreds of excited supporters, and they'd get to film Obama giving his core stump speech.
That's just brilliant efficiency. It grows your email list, expands your donor base, and feeds your volunteer army all at the same time.
And the key to it all was that the relationship with those volunteers felt authentic. They treated the people who hosted small fundraisers in their living rooms just as seriously as the big donors, giving them direct access on conference calls with Obama and senior staff.
So when volunteers felt valued and strategically important, they just worked harder.
They dug deeper, they kept raising money. It was a tactical relationship that, crucially, felt real.
But for all that organizational discipline, the campaign wasn't immune to, internal problems. Plouffe described the pace as a marathon at sprint pace.
Yeah, and none of them, especially the candidate, were really prepared for it.
This led to a real crisis in morale in the spring of 2007.
It did. The candidate, Barack Obama, was admittedly unmotivated and hesitant at first. He was really struggling to adjust to the crushing 247 demands of a presidential campaign. He was used to the measured pace of the Senate. This was a different world.
That must have been a really difficult moment for the senior staff. I mean, how do you go to your candidate and tell him he doesn't seem into it?
Very carefully, but it was urgent. Axelrod, Plouffe, and another senior advisor, Pete Rouse, set up a very candid private dinner to deliver a tough critique.
What did they say?
They told him he had to find his internal motivation, or at least get better at hiding his weariness. They acknowledged that his ambivalence was having a negative impact on staff morale. Staffers could tell he seemed unhappy to be there.
And what was his reaction? Did he blow up?
No. And his reaction is really key to understanding the campaign's whole culture. He was irritated at first, sure, but he eventually accepted the point with what Plouffe called disarming candor.
So he didn't just apologize and move on.
No. Plouffe said he was a logical guy, so instead of just saying sorry, he actually wrote an internal memo about his own struggles and his state of mind, which is just unheard of in a high-stakes campaign. That level of self-reflection defined their normalcy.
That commitment to normalcy, to not being histrionic, was central. Plouffe said he made criticisms on the merits. If a tactic was wrong, he'd say so, but then he'd move on.
Right. And that allowed the staff to focus on solving problems without that constant anxiety of, what's the candidate going to yell about today?
But the external threats were constant. They struggled early with vetting, which Plouffe admits was way behind schedule.
Yeah, they were getting blindsided all the time by reporters or opponents coming at them with new questions about his past. It put them on the defensive constantly.
And that vetting lapse led to their first major political embarrassment, which they called Punjab Gate. What was that, and why did Obama react so strongly?
Punjab Gate was basically standard political hardball blowing up in their faces. Their research team put together a document on Hillary Clinton's stance on outsourcing jobs, and they mentioned the potential impact on places like Punjab, India.
And then they leaked this opposition research to reporters to try to generate some negative stories. Standard practice, if a little dirty.
Very standard. But Obama was, quote, furious and disappointed. He called it the first time he was truly embarrassed by his own campaign.
His reaction was immediate and severe.
It was. He basically told them, get control of it or I won't allow us to send anything but our schedule out to the press. For him, it just violated the high standard he had set, the whole rationale for why he was running in the first place.
It really reinforced that internal pledge to a higher standard of conduct. Let's talk about strategic discipline, because they were also ruthless about rejecting outside help if it didn't fit the narrative.
Oh, absolutely. They were obsessed with protecting their message, of being a fresh alternative to the establishment. We see this really clearly when they were faced with potential big-name endorsements.
Like with Al Sharpton.
Right, a huge national figure. He indicated he might come to Iowa right before the caucuses, and the campaign made the conscious decision to reject his help.
Which is an incredibly risky move. You risk alienating key figures in the African-American establishment. Why do it?
They were worried it would undermine their standing with undecided voters, particularly white caucus goers. They feared it would create a press sideshow, or imply Sharpton was some kind of influential advisor, which ran completely counter to their message of independent grassroots change.
They prioritized strategic clarity over a late-game celebrity endorsement.
They did, and they pulled a similar move later with John Kerry, the party's nominee from 2004.
Plouffe says Kerry offered an endorsement late in the primary. So why on earth would you turn down the support of the party's last standard bearer?
It was a massive strategic calculation. Accepting Kerry's endorsement would have guaranteed them a dominant news cycle for a day or two, no question.
Hmm.
But Kerry was the establishment. He was the old guard of the Democratic Party. They calculated that his endorsement would actually sap momentum and turnout among the exact voters they needed most: the new, the young, the independent.
Wow, so they chose potential turnout over a guaranteed headline.
They did. They kept the outsider narrative clean.
This focus on delivering an authentic message, unfiltered by the media or establishment, it carried over into the debates too.
It did. Voters consistently gave Obama higher marks for his debate performances than the professional pundits did.
Which just reinforced the campaign's core belief that the audience was looking for a candidate who wasn't just reading from a worn script.
They were looking for genuineness, and they saw a candidate responding honestly, even on really risky topics.
The prime example being his stance on diplomacy. He said he'd be willing to talk to America's enemies, like Iran, without preconditions.
And he was immediately attacked for it. Rivals called him naive and soft.
But Plouffe notes that it polled incredibly well in Iowa.
It did, because it signaled that Obama represented a deep, substantive change in foreign policy from the Bush-Cheney years. The voters were more sophisticated than the pundits gave them credit for.
But that relentless pace, all the strategic risks, it eventually led to a huge setback. The New Hampshire primary loss, right after their big Iowa win.
That was a massive psychological blow.
All the polls, internal and public, had him ahead. The pundits were calling it an easy victory.
And then it all fell apart. The whole momentum narrative was built on those cascading wins. What changed was Hillary Clinton had this emotional, very humanizing moment at a coffee shop the day before the primary. Her voice cracked. She talked about how hard the campaign was.
And that moment, played on a loop on TV, it resonated deeply, especially with female voters, and it just completely reversed the polls in less than 24 hours.
Yeah. They went from being up 6 points in early exit polls to losing.
So how did Obama handle the panic that must have been spreading through his staff and supporters?
His immediate response was crucial. He told the staff, no head hanging. He said they had to process the loss practically. And then, in car, he actually reframed the loss as a positive.
Wow.
He said, now people can see how I deal with adversity. They want me to earn this. It showed this incredible ability to pivot, to change the narrative in the face of a major defeat.
And that mental toughness was tested almost immediately by the biggest crisis of the entire primary, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright controversy.
Oh, man. The inflammatory clips from Obama's longtime pastor, they just threatened to completely destroy his message of unity and define him as a radical.
Plouffe admitted the campaign acted like novices on this one.
They did. They had been in denial. They delayed properly vetting those explosive sermon clips. The timing was also just awful. It happened right as the Tony Rezko fraud trial was starting, another distraction. And they had tough primaries coming up in Ohio and Texas. The campaign just felt completely overwhelmed.
So there's no political playbook for a crisis like this. What did they do?
The candidate himself chose the most audacious move possible. Instead of just putting out a short, sterile press release distancing himself, he decided he was going to give a major, substantive, televised speech on race in America.
He personally rewrote the draft statement and insisted on delivering this huge speech within a day or two, despite his schedule.
He told his team, I have been thinking about this for almost 30 years. It was the ultimate embodiment of that audacity strategy, using a moment of political crisis to try and force a deeper, more nuanced national conversation.
And it worked, at least for a while. It didn't make the controversy vanish, but it stopped the immediate bleeding and forced a different, more elevated discussion about race, moving the focus away from just those looped sound bites.
It proved that when he had strong material, especially material he had a hand in writing, he could hit the clutch shot under the most intense pressure imaginable.
Okay, so they finally emerge from that grueling primary, and they immediately face another huge controversial decision that's going to set the tone for the general election.
The choice to opt out of the federal public finance system.
Which was a big deal because it went against his reformer image and a prior commitment he'd made to stay in the system.
It was a purely practical decision, but yeah, the political fallout was massive. The public system gave you about $85 million for the general election.
And the campaign, because of their incredible grassroots digital network, knew they could raise way more than that on their own.
Potentially $100 million more than that. So giving up that fundraising advantage meant running a less rigorous campaign, maybe even making the same mistakes the Kerry campaign made in 2004.
So the decision was really about control and scale.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Opting out gave them the financial freedom to run their own ads, positive, negative, demographic specific, and to keep a fully staffed field operation in all 50 states. If they'd stayed in, they would have had to cede control over their own message to the DNC and outside groups.
And how did they defend this against charges of flip-flopping?
Their defense was critical. They pointed out that they had banned all contributions from PEGs and lobbyists, a claim John McCain, who stayed in the system, couldn't make. His campaign immediately scooped up all the insider money they could find.
So they argued their way was actually more democratic. Then came the electoral map. This was maybe the ultimate display of their general election audacity. Their strategy was aggressively offensive.
They knew that just defending the states John Kerry won in 2004, which only gets you to 252 electoral votes, would put them in a permanent defensive crouch for the whole election.
So instead, they went after traditional Bush states,
Right.
places like Virginia, Indiana, North Carolina, states that had been solid Republican turf for decades.
The goal was to force McCain to spend money and time defending his own turf and to create multiple different combinations, multiple paths to 270. Plouffe called it a complex puzzle.
This was a huge break from tradition. The press corps was so conditioned to only focus on, Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania.
Right. And they saw Obama's strategy as flawed for being too broad. The campaign often felt like they were running one race while the media was covering a completely different, more traditional one.
They were trying to redefine the entire electoral landscape.
They even joked internally that their headline should be, Obamacam, we can win without Ohio, Florida. They were forcing the opposition to stretch their resources by playing in territory they hadn't had to defend in a generation.
Before the conventions, they made another critical move to counter that inevitable experience critique.
The big foreign trip in July. Iraq, Afghanistan, Europe, and Berlin. It was all designed to show Obama operating effectively on the world stage to show he had presidential stature.
And it culminated in that massive outdoor rally in Berlin.
That was pure audacity, speaking directly to hundreds of thousands of Europeans, basically demonstrating that the world was hungry for new American leadership. It was a visual way to counter the experience gap by emphasizing his potential as a global leader.
That rally did generate some controversy, though, because of one line.
Tonight, I speak to you not as a candidate for president, but as a citizen, a proud citizen of the United States and a fellow citizen of the world.
Yeah, some conservative commentators jumped on that, calling it post-nationalist.
And the campaign just completely dismissed that criticism. They saw it as looking in the rearview mirror. For them, that line captured the exact kind of hopeful, global-minded change they believed most Americans and the world were ready for.
The VP selection was another moment of pure strategic calculation. He was worried about picking Hillary.
He was. He concluded that Bill may be too big a complication. So they landed on Joe Biden.
And Biden was chosen specifically for his deep foreign policy and legislative experience, a trusted advisor who could command respect from day one.
Right. They made the call despite some internal nervousness about his history of, off-the-cuff remarks. But his experience was seen as essential to shore up the ticket.
And they even used the VP announcement itself for organizational gain. They announced it via text message.
Be the first to know.
Yeah.
It's still a pretty new political tool back then.
And it was a huge success. The mobile list grew from under 10,000 to over 2 million signups in just a couple of weeks. It was perfectly consistent with their new media strategy. Then the general election gauntlet really began, starting with McCain's pick of Sarah Palin, a political earthquake.
The Hurricane Sarah, they called it.
Yeah.
She generated this immense energy in media coverage, and she really threatened to completely destabilize the race.
So what was the Obama campaign's strategy?
To be disciplined, hold tight, and avoid a shooting match. They recognized that while her appeal was strong with the GOP base, it created an urgent, existential panic among their own supporters and liberal donors.
So her pick actually helped them.
Massively. Millions of dollars were raised unsolicited online for Obama in the weeks right after the Palin pick. They joked internally, Sarah Palin has now become our best fundraiser. Her nomination energized their field offices like nothing else could have.
The next big test was the financial crisis in September 2008. McCain dramatically suspends his campaign, returns to Washington, and calls for postponing the first debate.
And Obama refused to follow him. He decided to go ahead with the debate schedule, which made him look strong, confident, and steady.
It created this perfect strategic contrast. McCain looked erratic and a bit desperate, while Obama's calm demeanor made him seem more presidential during a moment of chaos.
He embraced that contrast.
And finally, the William Ayers attack. McCain waited way too long until mid-October to launch that palling around with terrorists line of attack.
Right, and voters are always skeptical of those kinds of late-game attacks. It just didn't land.
And the Obama campaign counterpunched brilliantly by going after McCain's own judgment, bringing up the Keating Five scandal from his past. Why was that such a strategic brushback pitch?
The Keating Five was this major political scandal in the late 80s, where McCain and 4 other senators were implicated in improperly helping a big donor. While McCain was mostly cleared, the scandal questioned his ethics. By bringing it up, the Obama campaign was signaling they weren't afraid to play hardball. They were saying, if you want to talk about poor judgment based on old associations, we are ready to have that conversation about your record.
And ultimately, Obama and Biden swept all 3 debates, which provided that crucial permission structure for hesitant voters to finally choose the new guy with the strange name.
And that electoral expansion strategy proved to be a wild success. They won in places like North Carolina, Indiana, Virginia states that were supposed to be solid Bush territory.
And this is the core takeaway, the most telling statistic from the source material.
It's incredible. If you only count the people who also voted in the 2004 election, Obama beat McCain by a razor-thin margin, 50 to 49%.
So the entire margin of victory, the decisive mandate, it came from the new and sporadic voters that their grassroots and digital effort had mobilized.
Exactly. His appeal was driven by integrity, by his call for a new, more civil dialogue, by treating voters like adults and discussing issues with nuance, defying the political playbook every step of the way. It was just such a comprehensive strategy, built on that organizational rigor and constant risk-taking. Just to recap a couple of the most surprising strategic nuggets.
The self-imposed salary cap and that no-drama culture, it wasn't just a nice idea, it was a vital organizational strategy that kept them from derailing.
Absolutely. And the sheer guts it took to reject those high-profile endorsements from people like Kerry and Sharpton.
Right, prioritizing the long-term narrative of being an outsider over a short-term media hit.
And of course, that huge general election gamble, opting out of public financing to gain total control over this vast offensive electoral map. They weren't just trying to get to 270, they were creating multiple paths to victory.
Plouffe writes about the immense, almost crushing pressure they felt to win. And not just for the candidate, but to preserve the spark and belief they had ignited in millions of young and new volunteers.
They were genuinely worried that a loss would extinguish that entire generation's political engagement for good.
And Obama himself, reflecting on it right after the win, he told Plouffe that he thought he was actually better suited to be president than he was to be a candidate.
Yeah, that he was better at managing critical meetings, gathering opinions, using the bully pulpit, all the skills he had to use to manage those crises throughout the campaign.
Which brings us back to that final mandate and the source material's most provocative finding. Among 2004 voters, Obama won by a single point, 50-49. The whole clear mandate for change came from expanding the electorate.
And that raises a crucial question for you, the listener, as you think about modern political organizing. If the victory among habitual voters is always going to be that razor thin, does a clear mandate for change now depend less on persuading the few people in the middle?
And more on finding the millions of people who have never participated before. Does the campaign of the future rely almost entirely on the ability to continuously expand the electorate beyond its traditional baseline?
It's a big question.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the audacious strategy that built a presidency.